The rain began hours before dawn, the kind that didn't fall so much as it poured, soaking through everything with a quiet, relentless rhythm. By the time Claire Roberts arrived at the old Blake estate for her wedding rehearsal, the gravel driveway had turned to gray mud, and the roses that lined the gates drooped like wilted confessions. Inside, the house glowed with golden chandeliers and polished smiles. Laughter rolled through the hallways, clinking glasses and the hum of last-minute preparations. Claire stood near the grand staircase in a pale ivory dress, her auburn hair pulled into a loose knot, a diamond hairpin catching the light. She was the picture of calm, or at least she tried to be. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Margaret Roberts, her mother, noticed it from across the room. She had the kind of gaze that saw through walls and polite laughter. A mother's instinct sharpened by life's disappointments. She knew nerves when she saw them, but this wasn't nervous joy. This was something else. "Sweetheart, you okay?" she asked softly, joining her by the staircase. Claire smiled, but her voice wavered. "Just excited, Mom. You know how I get before big moments." Margaret nodded, though her stomach tightened. Claire had always been transparent, incapable of hiding her emotions, except when it came to Daniel Blake. Around him, her daughter seemed to turn into someone else, quieter, cautious, almost rehearsed. When Daniel entered the room, all eyes followed. He had that kind of charm people mistake for sincerity. Tall, handsome, an easy grin that melted tension. He kissed Claire's forehead, his arm slipping possessively around her waist as though she were a trophy. "Everything's perfect," he said to her. "Just the way we planned." His tone was warm, but something about it chilled Margaret. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted across the room, calculating. Maybe it was the faint impatience behind every smile. The rehearsal dinner went smoothly enough, champagne, laughter, toasts about love and forever. But as the evening deepened and thunder grumbled in the distance, Margaret noticed Daniel excuse himself. "Quick call," he mouthed, stepping outside into the rain, with his phone pressed tightly to his ear. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Through the window, Margaret caught sight of him in the courtyard, standing under the archway. His back was tense, his face shadowed by the dim lights. She couldn't hear his words, but his expression said everything. Anger, frustration, panic. "Don't call me again," he snapped, his voice carrying faintly through the downpour. "You'll ruin everything." He turned, suddenly aware of someone watching. Margaret had shifted slightly near the window. Their eyes met through the glass, just for a moment, before he plastered on a smile and walked back inside, rain dripping off his tailored suit. "Business call," he said cheerfully, brushing past her. "You know how it is. Clients never rest." Margaret didn't respond. She just watched him go, unease curdling in her chest like spoiled milk. Later that night, after the guests had left and the laughter had faded, she drove home alone through the storm. The windshield wipers scraped rhythmically, her thoughts louder than the thunder outside. Claire was marrying that man in less than 48 hours, and something deep in her bones whispered, "Don't let it happen." At a red light, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then opened the message. "You don't know who your daughter's marrying. Check the Orchid Hotel, room 407, tonight." Margaret's pulse surged. She reread the message 3 times, her hand trembling. There was no name, no clue, just that single line glowing against the dark screen. For a long moment, she sat frozen, rain hammering the car roof. Logic told her to ignore it. Probably some prank, or worse, a jealous ex trying to stir chaos. But another part of her, the part that had protected Claire from every scraped knee and heartbreak, whispered something else. What if it's true? She exhaled shakily, turned the wheel, and drove. By the time she reached the Orchid Hotel, it was close to midnight. The building rose out of the rain like a secret. Modern glass and soft amber light. She parked 2 blocks away, her heart slamming against her ribs. The lobby was quiet. A faint floral scent hung in the air. She approached the front desk, trying to sound casual. "I'm supposed to meet Mr. Blake in room 407, she said, slipping her most confident smile. "Could you remind me of his room just to be sure?" The clerk didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Blake's suite is 407. He's one of our regular guests. Shall I ring him for you? Margaret froze. Regular guest. Her throat tightened. No, she said quickly. No need to disturb him. She turned away before the clerk could ask more questions and slipped into the elevator. As the doors closed, the digital floor numbers blinked upward. 2, 3, 4. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls. Drenched hair, trembling lips, eyes full of fear, and something fiercer, determination. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway was silent except for the faint hum of distant thunder. Room 407 was halfway down. A strip of light leaked from beneath the door. Margaret stood there for a moment, listening to her heartbeat. Then she took a breath, stepped forward, and reached for the handle. It wasn't locked. She pushed it open slowly, and what she saw inside would begin the unraveling of everything her daughter believed in. The door creaked open with a soft click, and the first thing Margaret noticed was the smell. A mix of expensive cologne and something faintly floral, like perfume that didn't belong to a man. The curtains were half drawn, rainlight flickering across the carpet in silver stripes. The room looked lived in, not rented. A jacket hung carelessly over the chair, a wine glass half empty on the table. On the bed lay a laptop, still open, humming softly. Margaret hesitated on the threshold. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back. This wasn't her place, not her life to intrude upon. But then she thought of Claire, of her soft smile that morning, the way she had said, "I've never loved anyone like him, Mom." So Margaret stepped inside. She closed the door quietly behind her, water dripping from her coat onto the carpet. The hotel's air conditioning whispered through the silence. On the screen, an email thread glowed faintly. From Daniel Blake. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, guilt flooding through her, but she clicked anyway. The emails weren't business. Subject, missed you already. Can't wait to see you next week, love. Tell our little man Daddy's almost home. Margaret's breath caught. She scrolled down. More messages, more photos. Daniel shirtless in a backyard she didn't recognize, holding a small boy. The woman beside him, early 30s, dark-haired, smiling like someone who believed she was safe. My wife, one of the messages read. My everything. Margaret felt her knees weaken. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand gripping the sheets. The hotel's Wi-Fi pinged a new notification. A calendar reminder, check-in, the Orchid Hotel, Suite 407. Repeat, every second and fourth Thursday. Her throat went dry. He had a schedule for his lies. Then she noticed the leather wallet on the nightstand. She flipped it open. 2 IDs. One was the Daniel Blake she knew, real estate agent, address in the city. The other bore the same face but a different name. David Harrow listed as consultant. 2 names, 2 lives, 1 man. A faint sound made her freeze. The elevator ding, followed by muffled footsteps down the hallway. Voices, a woman's soft laugh. Margaret's pulse spiked. She darted toward the bathroom door and slipped inside, leaving it ajar just enough to see through the sliver of light. The door opened. Daniel entered, shaking the rain from his hair, his tone light and intimate. You're soaked, he said to someone. I told you to wait in the car. A woman's voice answered, low, tender. You know I hate waiting. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. The woman came into view. The same one from the photos. She carried a small child, maybe 4 years old, half asleep against her shoulder. Daniel took the child gently, setting him on the couch with the familiarity of a father. Mommy, the boy mumbled. Margaret's heart broke. Hey, little man, Daniel said softly, brushing the boy's hair back. Daddy's here now. Margaret bit down hard on her knuckle to keep silent. The woman smiled, slipping off her coat. You'll come by tomorrow, right? He misses you. Daniel hesitated. I'll try. I've just got this event. After that, we'll be together properly, I promise. Event. The word burned in Margaret's ears. That event was her daughter's wedding. The woman, Emily, Margaret recalled from the email signature, sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. You keep saying that, but I know when you're lying, Daniel. He kissed her forehead. Trust me, After this week, everything changes. He smiled, that same rehearsed smile Claire had fallen for. Warm enough to deceive, practiced enough to wound. Margaret couldn't breathe. She slipped her phone from her pocket, trembling as she captured a quick photo. Daniel holding Emily, their son in the background. Proof. Then another. The wallet with both IDs, the open laptop showing the email thread. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped the phone. Daniel's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned. Damn, battery's dying, he muttered, tossing it on the table, right beside the laptop. Let's order food, I'm starving. When they stepped into the kitchenette, Margaret moved fast. She crossed the room, grabbed her coat, and eased the door open. Her heartbeat thundered louder than the storm outside. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she exhaled a shuddering breath, then ran. By the time she reached her car, she was soaked again, her hair plastered to her face. She sat behind the wheel, gasping, hands trembling as she replayed what she'd seen. Her daughter's fiancé, a husband, a father, a liar. She forwarded the photos and screenshots from her phone to her own email, just in case. Then she sat there for a long while, rain drumming on the windshield before whispering to herself, he's not taking her down with him. At that exact moment, her phone lit up again. Another message from the unknown number. Did you see it for yourself? Now you know. Don't let him ruin another life. Margaret's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Whoever sent those texts wasn't just warning her. They knew everything. Lightning split the sky in front of her as she started the car. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing. The wedding would not go as planned. Margaret barely slept that night. When she closed her eyes, all she saw was Daniel's face, smiling as he held that little boy, his hands steady, his voice calm, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The storm had passed by dawn, but the house felt heavy, still filled with the echoes of rain and dread. She sat by the window with a mug of untouched coffee, staring out into the pale morning light. The photographs were on her phone, clear, undeniable, and yet she couldn't bring herself to send them to Claire. She had raised her daughter to be kind, trusting, loyal, to love with her whole heart, and now that very heart was about to be shattered. She whispered to herself, how do I tell her? By mid-morning, Margaret arrived at the Roberts home, the scent of lilies and wedding perfume already thick in the air. Claire stood in the kitchen, barefoot, hair in curlers, humming softly as she arranged flowers for the centerpieces. She looked radiant, the picture of a bride who still believed in happy endings. Good morning, Mom, she said brightly. Big day tomorrow. Can you believe it's finally here? Margaret managed a small smile. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Claire beamed, then frowned slightly. Are you okay? You look pale. Margaret hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter. Just tired. Long night. Did Dad call? Claire asked, misreading the tension. He's probably still in Florida for that conference, right? Margaret nodded absently, but her mind was miles away. In room 407, in that dim light where she'd seen her daughter's future collapse. When Daniel arrived an hour later, the air shifted. He was carrying a bouquet of white roses and that same effortless charm that had once even fooled Margaret. He kissed Claire on the cheek and turned to greet her mother with a smile too wide, too polished. Mrs. Roberts, he said warmly, you must be excited for tomorrow. Your daughter's about to make me the luckiest man alive. Margaret held his gaze. That depends on what kind of man you are. He chuckled, pretending not to notice the weight in her tone. The kind who treats her like gold. Her jaw tightened. Gold can be melted down, she said quietly. Daniel blinked, just for a second, before regaining his composure. You've got quite the sense of humor, ma'am. Claire laughed, brushing off the tension. Oh, come on, Mom, don't interrogate him before the wedding. But Margaret wasn't laughing. She watched every gesture, every look he gave her daughter, every carefully measured word. It wasn't love she saw in his eyes. It was control. After brunch, Daniel stepped outside to take another call. Margaret followed quietly, stopping just behind the door that led to the garden. His voice carried through the crack, sharp, low, impatient. I told you after the wedding. I'll transfer everything once it's official. Don't call me again until then. Her heart pounded. Transfer everything? Then came the woman's voice, faint but trembling. Daniel, please. Don't do this. You said you'd fix it. You said we'd be safe. He hissed. Keep quiet, Emily. I'm handling it. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Emily, the woman from the hotel. Her fingers shook as she recorded the conversation, her phone barely steady. When Daniel ended the call and re-entered the house, she slipped back into the hallway, her heart slamming in her chest. It wasn't just infidelity. He was planning something far darker. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Margaret sat alone on the porch, thinking. If she confronted Claire now, her daughter might not believe her. She knew how love blinds even the smartest people. Claire would defend him, insist there was an explanation, that it was all a misunderstanding. But if Margaret waited until the wedding, if she exposed him in front of everyone, there would be no denial left. The world would see the truth. Still, her conscience tore at her. Was it cruel to humiliate him publicly, or crueler to let her daughter bind herself to a fraud? When Claire came outside, her voice was soft. Mom, you've been quiet all day. Did I do something wrong? Margaret reached out and touched her daughter's hand. No, honey, you did everything right. Claire smiled, relieved. You'll see. Daniel's everything I prayed for. He's going to make me so happy. Margaret forced a nod, her throat tight. I'm sure he will, she said. But inside, the truth screamed loud enough to shake her bones. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she whispered to the dark, tomorrow she'll hate me, but she'll be free. The morning of the wedding rose soft and golden, the kind of light that makes the world look like forgiveness. But for Margaret Roberts, there was no peace in it. Her chest felt like a drum of thunder waiting to break. She woke before dawn, her heart restless. Downstairs, the house was already alive. Florists arranging bouquets, caterers setting up trays, bridesmaids laughing over mimosas. The air smelled of champagne and roses. Claire stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, every inch of her glowing with nervous joy. The ivory lace clung to her shoulders like sunlight, her hair pinned up with pearls. When she turned and saw her mother, her eyes shimmered. Do I look okay? She asked, almost shy. Margaret swallowed the ache in her throat. You look like a dream, sweetheart. But dreams, she thought, are fragile things, and this one was about to be broken. She tried to memorize the image of her daughter before the storm, the innocence, the faith, the soft hope in her eyes, because once the truth came out, none of that would survive untouched. At 10:30, Daniel arrived at the estate. He wore a black tuxedo that fit too perfectly, the kind of man who never wrinkled, never stumbled, never let the mask slip. His smile was dazzling, his eyes hollow. Ready to make me the happiest man alive? He said, pressing a kiss to Claire's cheek. Margaret turned away. She couldn't bear it. Every laugh, every touch, every compliment that followed felt like a slow-motion lie. She kept replaying the scene in room 407. The boy, the wife, the emails, and now, layered on top of it, the recorded call, his promise to transfer everything after the wedding. At 11:45, just before guests began to arrive, Margaret's phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He's still lying. She deserves to know. Her fingers trembled. Whoever this was, they were still watching. She stepped outside to clear her head, clutching her phone like a secret grenade. The garden had been transformed into a fairy tale. Silk ribbons, white roses, a string quartet rehearsing under the gazebo. Laughter drifted across the lawn, but she heard none of it. Her eyes caught movement at the gate. A woman stepping out of a taxi, holding a small boy's hand. Margaret's heart nearly stopped. Emily. The woman looked hesitant, clutching a small purse and an envelope. When her gaze found Margaret's, recognition flashed. She approached slowly, her voice trembling. You're Claire's mother? Margaret nodded. You must be Emily. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how else to reach you. I'm sorry if I scared you with those texts. Margaret's breath caught. That was you. Emily nodded. I didn't want another woman to end up like me. Her words came out in waves. How Daniel had vanished 2 months ago after promising to settle things. How he drained their joint account, how she discovered he was still seeing someone, but couldn't prove who. Then she handed Margaret a small folder. Hotel receipts, credit transfers, a copy of a marriage certificate, legal proof. Margaret flipped through the papers, her pulse hammering. "You have no idea what this means," she whispered. Emily's voice cracked. "He's a liar, Mrs. Roberts. He's not just cheating. He's using people. Women, money, everything." Margaret looked past her toward the venue, the sound of violins floating through the air. Guests were taking their seats. Claire would be walking down that aisle in minutes. She turned back to Emily. "Stay here, don't go inside yet." Emily frowned. "Why?" Margaret's eyes hardened. "Because I need to make sure when he falls, everyone sees it happen." Inside, the music began. Bridesmaids took their places, smiling, whispering. The officiant cleared his throat. Daniel stood under the arch, flawless in his charm. Margaret moved to her seat, clutching her purse. Inside it, the photos, the recording, the documents. Then she saw Claire at the top of the aisle. Radiant, innocent, walking slowly toward a man who had already promised his life to another woman. Her daughter's eyes locked with hers for a fleeting second. Margaret smiled faintly, even as her chest burned. "One more minute," she told herself. "Just one more minute, and it'll be over." The vows began. Daniel's voice was steady, smooth. "I, Daniel Blake, take you, Claire Roberts." Margaret's heart pounded. She looked toward the garden gate. Emily stood there now, her son beside her, watching, waiting, silent witnesses to the lie about to unfold. When Daniel finished his vow, the officiant turned to Claire. "And do you, Claire Roberts, take this man?" Margaret rose slowly from her seat. The music faltered. Heads turned. The wind caught her veil and carried it sideways like a ghost. "Before she answers that," Margaret said, her voice clear, trembling but unbreakable, "I think everyone deserves to know who this man really is." A gasp swept through the crowd. Daniel's smile froze, and in that moment, the fairy tale shattered. Silence fell like glass shattering. The violinist's bow hovered midair. The priest's mouth hung open, and every guest turned in slow motion toward the woman standing between the pews. Margaret Roberts, her hands shaking but her eyes cold and steady. Daniel's confident smile wavered. "Margaret," he began lightly, laughter forced into his tone. "Is everything all right?" She didn't answer him. Instead, she stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble path, one sharp sound after another, like a countdown. The sky darkened above them, clouds gathering as if the weather itself had decided to witness this. Claire looked terrified. "Mom, what are you doing?" Margaret's voice trembled only on the first word. After that, it grew stronger. "Sweetheart, before you say your vows, you need to hear mine." She turned to the guests, her voice slicing through the uneasy quiet. "I vow to protect my daughter from men who lie, cheat, and destroy everything they touch." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel tried to laugh again, louder this time. "Okay, I think maybe someone's had too much champagne." "Enough!" Margaret's voice cracked like thunder. "You think you can smile your way out of this, Daniel? You lied about everything. Your name, your life, your wife." Gas scattered through the garden. Claire's bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering like fragments of innocence. "What?" she whispered. Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. "I didn't want to do this here," she said, her voice breaking. "But you left me no choice." She held up the screen. On it, a photo. Daniel, arms wrapped around another woman, a small boy perched on his hip. The image projected easily in the minds of every person staring. The guests murmured louder now, a ripple of shock, confusion, judgment. The officiant stepped back. Daniel went pale, his jaw tightening. "That's not," he began, but Margaret cut him off. "Don't you dare deny it. I saw you. I was there. Orchid Hotel, room 407. You told that woman you'd come home after this event. You promised her and your son you'd return once you transferred everything into your name." Claire's face drained of color. "Daniel, is this true?" He turned to her, desperation flooding his expression. "She's twisting it. I can explain, but then a new voice rose from the back, trembling, broken, familiar to Margaret. Explain it to me then. Every head turned. Emily stood at the end of the aisle, holding her son's hand. The boy clutched a small stuffed bear, eyes wide at the sea of strangers. Gasps filled the garden. A bridesmaid dropped her bouquet. Cameras clicked. Emily's face was pale but resolute. Tell them who I am, Daniel. Tell them who he is. The boy looked up, confused. Daddy? That single word tore through the crowd like lightning. Claire staggered backward, one hand over her chest. Oh my God! Daniel's mask crumbled completely. He reached out, but Claire flinched as though his touch burned. Claire, please, listen. Don't you say my name, she cried, her voice raw. You lied to me every day. You kissed me while calling her your wife. The guests began to stand, murmuring. Someone whispered, he's married. Another said, that poor girl. Emily's voice shook. He didn't just lie. He stole from us, from me, from our son. He drained our savings for investments. And now I find out this. This wedding was part of his plan? Daniel's expression hardened, pride flashing beneath panic. You don't know what you're talking about. Margaret stepped between him and both women, her eyes blazing. I know exactly what's going on. You're a con artist. You marry women, drain their accounts, and move on. You almost made my daughter your next target. For the first time, Daniel looked cornered. You can't prove any of that. Margaret smiled grimly. I can. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small recorder. I recorded your call with Emily yesterday. Every word about transferring the money, every lie. Claire turned away, tears streaking her makeup. I believed everything you said, she whispered. Every promise, every story. Daniel reached for her arm. Claire, I was going to tell you. Margaret moved fast, stepping between them, her voice sharp. Touch her again, and I'll make sure you're the one wearing white. In a courtroom? Laughter and gas rippled through the crowd. Even the priest looked stunned. Daniel froze, realizing there was no escape. Reporters, local ones who had come to cover the lavish wedding, were already raising their cameras. Flashbulbs went off. Emily picked up her son and turned to Claire. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you deserve to know. Claire nodded weakly, voice trembling. You did the right thing. Margaret reached for her daughter, holding her tight as Claire broke into sobs. He can't hurt you anymore, she whispered. It's over. Daniel stood there, sweat glistening on his temples, eyes darting toward the exit. But the security guard had already stepped forward, blocking his path. As the guests began to murmur and scatter, the wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives ended in chaos. Flowers trampled, champagne glasses overturned, laughter replaced with whispers. And in the center of it all, Margaret held her daughter close, whispering through her tears, better a broken heart now than a broken life forever. The chaos lingered long after the guests left. The garden that had been bathed in music and sunlight only hours before now stood silent, its decorations sagging under the weight of rain and shame. A single veil drifted in the wind, caught on a rose bush. The air smelled of wilted flowers and champagne gone sour. Margaret stood at the edge of the lawn, watching the staff quietly dismantle what was left of the ceremony. Her hands were steady now. She felt no triumph, only exhaustion, like someone who'd run barefoot through fire and somehow made it to the other side. Behind her, the heavy wooden doors of the estate opened. Claire stepped out slowly, her white gown streaked with mud, her mascara smudged like bruises. She looked nothing like the radiant bride from that morning, but there was something new in her eyes. A quiet strength, raw and fragile, but real. Mom, she whispered. Margaret turned. Sweetheart. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rustle of wind through the ruined decorations. Then Claire walked forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. The hug was desperate, not the kind that seeks comfort, but the kind that says, thank you for saving me, before it was too late. When Claire finally pulled back, her voice was hoarse. I didn't want to believe you, even when you stood up in front of everyone. Part of me thought you were wrong. But when I saw that woman, that child, her voice broke. Margaret brushed the hair from her face gently. I know, baby, you loved him. You saw who he pretended to be. Claire's jaw tightened. He almost took everything. I gave him access to my savings, Mom. He said he was investing for our future. Margaret closed her eyes. He wasn't investing. He was preparing to leave. Just then, a man in a gray suit approached. Detective Harris, the officer who had responded after the scene, turned into a public scandal. Daniel hadn't gotten far. The hotel documents Emily had brought, along with Margaret's photos and the recording, were enough for an arrest. Fraud, identity theft, bigamy. The list kept growing by the minute. He's in custody, Harris said quietly. And Mrs. Blake, Emily, confirmed the financial trail. We'll be in touch for formal statements, but you can rest easy. He won't hurt anyone for a long time. Margaret nodded. Thank you. When he left, Claire sank onto a nearby bench. Her wedding ring, the one Daniel had given her, glinted faintly on her finger. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled it off. The diamond caught a sliver of afternoon light before she let it fall into the damp grass. I used to think love made people better, she said softly, but now I think it just reveals who they really are. Margaret sat beside her, their shoulders touching. Love itself isn't the problem, she said gently. It's who we give it to. Claire leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. You knew. How? Margaret hesitated, then smiled faintly. Mothers always know. We just pray we're wrong. They sat, there until the sun began to set, painting the broken garden in shades of gold and gray. Emily appeared a short while later, her son in tow. The little boy ran across the grass, chasing petals the wind had scattered. Claire watched him with soft, distant eyes. I'm sorry, Emily said quietly. I didn't mean for your day to end like this. Claire shook her head. You saved me. You didn't ruin my wedding. You rescued me from a lifetime of lies. Emily smiled through tears. We both got caught in his web. For a moment, the two women, strangers only a day ago, shared something wordless and deep. Pain, betrayal, survival. As they spoke, Margaret glanced toward the sky, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause or headlines that said, Mother saves daughter. It came in quiet ways, in the strength to speak when silence would have been easier. 2 weeks later, the story hit the local news. Real estate broker arrested for fraud, bigamy, and identity theft. Bride's mother exposes scheme mid-wedding. Margaret didn't read the comments, but Claire did. Strangers called her brave. Others called her lucky. She didn't feel either. She just felt awake. One evening, as they packed away what was left of the wedding decorations, Claire found her mother watching the sunset from the porch. Do you think I'll ever trust anyone again? She asked. Margaret looked at her daughter, the same girl who once played dress-up in her old wedding gown, dreaming of fairy tales. Yes, she said softly, but next time, you'll trust yourself first. Claire nodded, wiping a tear. You were right about him, Mom. Margaret's voice broke on a whisper. I wish I hadn't been. As night fell, she thought of the words she'd said to herself in the dark days before the wedding. Tomorrow she'll hate me, but she'll be free. And now, watching her daughter rebuild, she finally understood. Freedom sometimes comes wrapped in heartbreak. But it's still freedom. The camera of life panned back. A ruined garden, a broken promise, a mother and daughter standing against the wind. And though everything around them was shattered, both women, in their quiet way, had won. Love makes us blind, Margaret thought. But a mother's love never looks away.